Well, if you haven't started taking notes yet, now's the time to get out your paper and pencil. We're going to talk about 5 major hormones that regulate digestive activity, 4 of which are produced by the duodenum. So the duodenum coordinates gastric activity once it receives chyme from the stomach. So the first hormone is gastrin, and this is secreted by the G cells in the stomach as well as by the cells of the duodenum, and it increases stomach mobility and production of gastric acids and enzymes. So once food lands in the stomach or duodenum, gastrin will be secreted to produce more enzymes for digestion, and this is particularly true when there's a lot of protein in the food. The second hormone is secretin, released by the duodenum, and it will increase the secretion of bile for the emulsification of fats and buffers from the pancreas to change the pH. The chyme is quite acidic and it needs to be neutralized by the buffers. It also decreases gastric mobility and secretory rates. By decreasing the gastric motility, it means the food will stay in the stomach longer for more digestion. GIP, or gastric inhibitory peptide, is released when fats and carbs enter the small intestine, and it inhibits gastric activity. It also increases the release of insulin from the pancreatic islets in the pancreas. The fourth hormone is CCK, or cholecystokinin. It's secreted by the duodenum, especially when there are lipids and proteins in the chyme. It increases enzyme production and secretion of enzymes from the pancreas, and it also causes the gallbladder to release its bile into the duodenum. This hormone, cholecystokinin, also inhibits gastric activity and may reduce hunger sensations. VIP, or vasoactive intestinal peptide, released by the duodenum, and it stimulates secretion of the intestinal glands. So it stimulates secretion of the further down the line. So these are intestinal glands to secrete all, usually a lot of carbohydrates are secreted by intestinal enzymes. And also regional capillaries are dilated so that more nutrients are absorbed. So this is the whole process. Here, gastrin is secreted by the stomach as well as by the duodenum, and the acid production is stimulated, and gastric motility is stimulated. There's more mixing, greater intensity of the mixing. Food hits or chyme, it's not food at that point, it hits the duodenum, and GIP is released that will release insulin from the pancreas. Cholecystokinin and secretin increase the release of enzymes. Bile is secreted, and then VIP dilates intestinal capillaries but stimulates intestinal gland secretions. Which of the following is retroperitoneal? Duodenum, or duodenum. Which of the following cells are located in gastric glands? Parietal cells. Which of the following will lipids be highly concentrated after a heavy meal? The lacteals. You have major problem if lipids enter your gallbladder. Which of the following is responsible for most nutrient absorption? Jejunum. Now we'll talk about the different phases of gastric secretion. There are three phases: the cephalic, or phase in your head, the cephalic phase, the stomach or gastric phase, and the intestinal phase. So gastric secretion, the phases are named according to the location of the control center involved. So the cephalic phase is, it begins when you see or smell food. It's directed by the central nervous system, and it prepares your stomach to receive the food. Gastric acid production increases. Parasympathetic impulses from the vagus nerve stimulate the submucosa plexus. This lasts a couple minutes. So mucus cells are producing mucus, Cheap cells producing pepsinogen, and parietal cells producing hydrochloric acid, G cells producing gastrin at the thought or smell of food. The gastric phase begins when the food arrives in the stomach. The stimulus includes distension of the stomach, increase in gastric pH, and the presence of undigested materials, especially proteins. Gastrin secretion increases the mixing waves, and it increases the secretion of the parietal and chief cells, and this gastric phase may last 3 to 4 hours. The intestinal phase begins when chyme enters the duodenum, usually after several hours of mixing. Of course, that depends on how much food you eat, or the types of food you eat. It will be mixing longer in the stomach if you have proteins and fats. So distension of the duodenum initiates the enterogastric reflex, which inhibits gastrin production. So gastric motility slows down, secretion slows down, and the pyloric sphincter, that's the sphincter at the end of the stomach, decreases, it stimulates the contraction of the pyloric sphincter, decreasing the chyme release into the duodenum. So the chyme is going to be secreted rhythmically through peristalsis into the duodenum, and mucus production is increased into the duodenum. Gastric central reflexes are triggered by the stimulation of stretch receptors in the stomach as it fills up. This accelerates movements along the small intestine, and the rate of chyme movement from the stomach into the small intestine is fastest when the stomach is really distended or full. The gastroenteric reflex stimulates motility and secretion along the entire small intestine, and the gastroileal reflex triggers the opening of the ileocecal valve, which is between the ileum and the cecum, allowing materials to pass from the small intestine to the large intestine. The large intestine is about 1.5 meters long, diameter is approximately 3 inches, and its major function is to reabsorb water, reabsorb vitamins, compact contents into feces, and store feces. There are 3 segments to the large intestine: the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. The cecum is the pouch that is just past the ileocecal valve. It collects and stores material, and it begins the process of compaction, which is the compression of the undigested material into feces. Attached to the cecum is the appendix, and the appendix is a lymphoid, contains lymphoid nodules. Appendicitis is inflammation of the appendix. The colon has 4 regions: the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. Ascending and descending colon are retroperitoneal. The ascending colon bends sharply to the left at the right colic or hepatic flexure. Transverse colon makes a 90-degree turn at the left colic or splenic flexure. The descending colon ends at the sigmoid flexure, and then the sigmoid colon is the S-shaped end of the colon, end of the large intestine. It empties into the rectum. So the rectum is the last 6 inches of the digestive tract, and it's expandable for feces storage. Movement of fecal material into the rectum triggers the urge to defecate. Other large intestinal structures include omental appendices. There's sacs of fat in the serosa of the colon, or the Tenei coli, 3 longitudinal bands of smooth muscle on the outer surface of the colon. The haustra are pouches in the colon. If you're inside the colon, you see you'd be walking through little houses, pouches. These produce internal folds in the intestinal lumen, and it's created by the muscle tone of that muscle band, the Tenei coli. This allows, the haustra allow for expansion and elongation of the colon. Mass movements are powerful. Mass movements occur throughout the day. A few times throughout the day, there will be very powerful peristaltic contractions, and it will begin at the transverse colon and push materials along the distal end of the large intestine. These movements are in response to eating, the distension of the stomach. Major characteristics of the large intestinal wall include, number 1, they lack villi. Number 2, they contain distinctive intestinal glands dominated by mucus glands. The mucus lubricates the feces as it becomes drier and more compact. The mucosa here in the large intestine does not produce enzymes. The anal canal is the distal portion of the rectum. It contains small longitudinal folds called anal columns. The epithelium transitions from columnar to stratified squamous epitheliums. Openings and exits to the body are usually stratified squamous. There is a network of veins in the lamina propria and submucosa. Increased venous pressure resulted from straining during defecation can distend the veins in the lamina propria, producing what are called hemorrhoids. And here's a picture of an internal hemorrhoid. Hemorrhoids can be called piles, and a picture of an external hemorrhoid. A fissure would occur if there's so much straining that the tissue tears. There are 2 sphincters, an internal and an external sphincter. The internal sphincter is smooth muscle and involuntary. The external sphincter is skeletal muscle and voluntary. And the anus is the exit of the anal canal, and the epidermis, like the skin, is keratinized here. There is little absorption in the small intestines, about less than 10% of all nutrient absorption. There is vitamin absorption here, and these vitamins are produced by normal bacteria in the colon. This would include vitamin B5, vitamin K, and biotin. We have 13 vitamins. 4 are fat-soluble, A, D, E, and K, and the others are vitamin C plus all of the B vitamins. In the large intestine, water is reabsorbed to prevent dehydration. About 1,500 mils of material enters the colon. Over 1 liter of water is reabsorbed through osmosis to allow approximately 200 mils of feces to be ejected. So feces are about 75% water. 20% of the mixture is indigestible material, inorganic matter, remains of epithelial cells. Remember all that cellulose that you ate? There's some cellulose in there because it hasn't been digested. About 5% of feces is bacteria.